I enjoy doing it because of the history of radio. And we're on. Hello, everybody. Here we are, ready for the exam. We're going to take a look, just like we did with the midterm. We're going to take a look at what you need to know in order to pass the exam, what we've done so far. We're going to do all of that. So let's just go ahead and get started right away and see what we're going to do. Okay, so here we are. Welcome to the final exam review. And I just thought I would plug this. If you can't get enough of me talking, you can see me and hear me Friday and Saturday and Sunday at the Hult Center, where I will be lecturing on what I call Christmas in Radioland, which is pretty much as it says there. It's how radio shaped American traditions. A lot of the traditions that we have when we trace it back, an American Christmas goes right back to radio. And once I'm done, then you can enjoy It's a Wonderful Life, which is a fantastic movie made by Frank Capra, which is being produced by the Radio Redux organization, live on stage, and you would be able to see what it's like in the old days when they actually produced radio programs. So I thought I'd plug that. So yes, my golden voice will be heard next weekend at the Hult Center. So we've now done our commercial, and we will move in to what this is all about, the final exam. The final exam is pretty much like our midterm. It is 1 week only. It starts Thursday, and it'll run through December 11, so it's Thursday to Thursday. And I'm going to repeat this, but it's just pretty much the same thing that we did, the same format, everything that we did with the midterm. It, again, will be, you will take it at the Social Science Testing Lab. That's the Center Building, 456. Do come early. Do be prepared to make your way through all of that construction that's going on over there. I understand there's lots of noise, so do be prepared for that. That's just the way it goes. And the exam does close on Thursday. So that's it. Once it's over on Thursday, and that's Thursday afternoon, that's not Thursday evening. So be vigilant and get in there early. Take the exam, because they do have Saturday hours. And of course, as before, there'll be no makeup exams. And do check those Saturday hours, because it's to your benefit. Okay, moving on. The final exam is like the midterm. There will be 50 questions. It's multiple choice. What else can I say? If you took the midterm, you have a good idea of what the final exam is going to be like. The study guides are now available on Moodle. And if you've been there, if you've taken a look at it, you'll see it's in a little different form than from our midterm study guide. And all I can say about that is Merry Christmas and you're welcome. Okay, remember, just as before, you got to have photo ID. And yes, again, you can have one 3x5 note card. And be sure to check and verify the hours of the testing lab. I just can't overemphasize that, because I certainly, I'm not going to entertain anybody's complaints about it, but you are at the mercy of their hours of operation. All right. A little discussion about our extra credit. It is due on December 9. You can email it to me, that's fine. But after December 9, after 10:30 in the morning, I will not accept it. So you've got to send it to me on December 9th. And again, as an attachment on email, that's fine. If not, if you want to hand deliver a paper to me, you can do that. Because I will be in my office, and you can, if I don't happen to be there for whatever reason, you can slide it under the door, and I'll be sure to get it. If you leave it in my mailbox, somehow send me an email or whatever to say, I left it in your mailbox, or I left it with someone in the office. Just communicate to me that you have some kind of extra credit that you are submitting. Now, if you're going to mail it to me, you've got to get it to me no later, and have a postmark no later than December 5. I don't know of anyone that does that anymore. You know, just send it to me by email. Moving on to what is it that we discussed since the midterm. Okay, we're going to look at everything involved in the combat film all the way through the edge of Hollywood, which is going on this week, which includes the film school generation and the film and the television age. So specifically, let's start with the combat war film. These are the things that you should know, the features of the genre. First, that laws and morality get suspended. It's, you know, as they used to say, all's fair in love and war. And that's what we have certainly in the combat film. There is a switch, an emphasis. It switches from the individual, which is what we see depicted in the Western, and it switches to the group, to the troops. It's now all for one and one for all. And lastly, women serve as emotional elements here. That women bring out male vulnerability. It's a He-Man universe. It's a He-Man world in the combat war film. But when women arrive, what you get is suddenly there's no more macho, but suddenly men become vulnerable. Perhaps, as one critic once said, they become human again, thanks to women in war films. The combat war film is also familiar with the anti-war sentiments that you find in the post-war films. Partly because of the Office of War Information, which we'll get to in a moment, but during the war, they're very pro-war. The movies that are made at that time are very much in support of the troops, very much in support of the effort, very much in support of victory, and any film that would be made that would depict the realities of war or show us in a different light would not have been made. Partially because of censorship, but most because of just the involvement of the studios in the war effort. Secondly, war films and the portrayal of racial integration of armed forces that occurs again in post-war films. The army is segregated, or the armed forces are segregated. There are white units and there are black units. And these are not discussed again during the war film. As a matter of fact, in most war films that are made during the war, it is very white. There's seldom any minorities depicted at all. But when the war is over, then the filmmakers have more latitude, and then they begin to take a look at what war is really like. An interesting film documentary that was made by John Huston during the war, the Battle of San Pietro, was censored because the war, it was very much a cameraman's objective view, and there were just too many deaths that were filmed, and not because of gore or violence or anything like that, but the film was censored and asked not to be distributed during the time of the war because it would simply lower morale at home. Okay, moving on. The fundamental American philosophy or ideology embedded in American war films is, succinctly, we may not always win physically, but we are always right ideologically. So yes, we may lose a battle here and there, but we are always right ideologically. And interestingly, too, in this is some Western films that were made during the war that depict this as well, the war, cavalry movies. And at this time, I'm thinking of They Died with Their Boots On, and the other film I'm thinking of is not a cowboy as such, a Western, but it is The Charge of the Light Brigade, two Errol Flynn movies that were made during the war, or at least approaching the war, late 30s. And the interesting thing about it is Custer, the movie They Died with Their Boots On, is all about Custer as a great hero kind of thing. And, of course, he's wiped out. And in The Charge of the Light Brigade, they, too, are wiped out. But the whole premise behind those two movies is, yeah, we lost the wars, those wars physically in a sense. They're wiped out. But as the movie ends, it picks up and says they will be vindicated, and so we remain ideologically right. Okay, also in the middle of all of this kind of war stuff is the Office of War Information. This was the role of the U.S. government in Hollywood film production. And the OWI was pretty much films that were made for propaganda purposes and to shape public opinion. They monitored these films. Now, it's arguable here. There was self-censorship in Hollywood. You have to remember this. The government did not censor films. Hollywood censored itself. And the government's role here was being an advisor to the Motion Picture Association of America. And they were just, at this point saying, it wouldn't do us any good to show a lot of films of defeat and destruction and loss of life and just a lot of pessimistic films. It's not going to help anybody here in the country. And so Hollywood said, it's a good notion. We'll work with you. And so they made the propaganda and the films in order to shape public opinion. One of the themes here, the formula that they followed, was the what is our video series called the Sergeant York Formula, which depicts the conversion of an objector to a supporter. This is the fellow who says, I don't want to go to war. War is evil. War is wrong. There's no reason to go to war. But as he's in that, and as he confronts all the violence, the destructive qualities of what's going on, he changes and becomes a supporter of the cause. That pretty much defines for us what the war films were all about in the 1940s and continued through the 1950s in depicting films about, that is, the 1950s, reflecting on the war years and making films about World War II, as well as the latest conflict, the Korean War. You get the Sergeant York formula. That is lost pretty much with Vietnam. With Vietnam, it's different. We now have films that are very critical of that war. And John Wayne comes along in 1968 and produces what you might say the only, although it's not necessarily true, because there is a small little B film out there, one of the first films to deal with Vietnam, called A Yank in Vietnam. And it's just a B movie, but so it's kind of one of the first movies to deal with it. But in this film, John Wayne, in the middle of all the protests, in the middle of all the youth rebellion, John Wayne makes a war film called The Green Berets. And what does he do? But he falls back on the World War II formula, the Sergeant York formula. And once again, we get the objector, this time one that everyone could relate to because he is a journalist who is opposed to the war. But as he accompanies John Wayne's troop or unit in the war, he suddenly changes and becomes a supporter. All right, moving on to everyone's favorite genre, film noir. The question that is asked, is film noir a true genre? And the reason we ask that question is because it does seem to be defined an awful lot by the way the movie looks. And one of the arguments about it is that you could, if by describing the way the movie, this particular movie looks, you could say, well, that's a film noir movie, and that would be Citizen Kane. But that question will never be answered because it is considered a genre, but most of this genre is pretty much defined by the way it looks, and that's where we get the word, the term film noir, from the French. It is a French word that means black film. They are adaptations of American pulp fiction and what they call the hard-boiled novels. These are the private detective novels. And actually, film noir as a genre, if we want to call it that, was discovered and debuted in post-war France. Now, it is a phenomenon itself in the sense that as an American film, it came after the war. It is a post-war phenomenon. But in the 1950s, it was the French critics who began to write about it and began to say, look at these kinds of films that the American filmmakers have made. Look at these with these certain characteristics and qualities, and it's a sort of black film. It is a dark film, and it's dealing with the dark side of American life, which we'll now look at. Because what we get in these films, the one thing that seems to be so exciting to these critics is the setting. The settings are urban. The setting in the downtown, they are rain-slicked streets, and I can't think, I'm sure there have been, but every time I think of any kind of film noir film, it's never shot in daylight. It seems like it's perpetually nighttime. And it's not only perpetually nighttime, but it's perpetually raining, at least, or it has been raining since the streets are always wet. And, of course, it deals with the sleazy side of city life. This is another aspect. This is not the kind of Norman Rockwell existence here in American culture. Instead, it is the big city, the downtown dark side of the big city, where you find all kinds of very unusual and interesting characters. You find these character types often are amnesiacs. Many of them are antisocial loners. The heroes are usually private detectives. And all of this character and setting combine to give us these themes of alienation and existentialism. In other words, the world of film noir is one in which all of the characters are alienated from not only their culture, they're alienated from their social setting, and they're alienated from each other. They just don't fit in. They just can't seem to find a niche in life, except often the villains. The villains have it made, but they corrupt that situation. And the existentialism that is also involved. The existentialism is there's no exit. This whole idea is we are doomed. We live in this sleazy side. We're alienated from everybody, including ourselves. And, we're never going to get out of this. And especially, we're never going to get out of it alive. The style is what we very much prefer and what we like when we see film noir. It is defined for us by low-key lighting. We have this lots of shadow. We have light and shadow. We have characters often that you don't even see their faces. They just remain in the shadows. Or if they do come out of the shadows, perhaps they walk into a lighting situation which just shows their eyes. There are always shadowy elements. Characters that live in the shadows. and the strange highlights that are there, as I just mentioned, like someone may be in a shadow, and as they walk into the light, all you see is their eyes, or in some cases, all you see is their mouth, if they've been talking, and then they walk into the light, but you just see their mouths. And then the extreme camera angles are also part of this. High and low angles, and distortion, what they call Dutch angles, which instead of just straight on footage, straight on aiming of the camera, instead it's tilted, and it's a low angle, or what in filmmaking parlance they would call an up angle onto things. So it creates for us a very disoriented and strange world, even stylistically. Also, that was mentioned in the video series, and very much an important part of it, of film noir, is the production code and film noir. And very simply what that is, as you see there, film noir often alluded to prohibited subjects without directly violating the code. I keep thinking of even homosexual relationships are shown in these films. But it is shown in such a way not to offend the censors, the self-censors, but they still get away with it, partly because of the overall side of that city life, and not just the homosexual side of that, but even sexuality itself. And this is usually depicted because the women, as it says there in our little slide, gender issues and film noir, which is women as femme fatales. It is the women who often control men in these films. This is one reason why feminists love film noir and love to talk about it, is because the women have power in these films. And it is often a very brutal and vicious power. In Double Indemnity, Barbara Stanwyck has an unbelievably role in that, in which she just controls every movement of Fred McMurray in that movie. And in my favorite film noir, the Black Angel, and I can't remember her name, it's a B movie, but in that film she controls the main character, the person that we are following. And also in that fabulous little B movie called Detour. That is the ultimate of film noir, because there you see a woman who is as vicious as they come and absolutely destroys our hero. Okay, in summary, film noir is a social commentary on post-war reality. It is a commentary on modern mass American culture, consumerism, and the disillusionment with Paradise Lost. In other words, after the war, things are a lot different. Okay, then we move to the television age, the post-war decline in attendance. What we have here is the threat of television. Yes, we talked about that all the way back to our orientation session. But TV is not the only culprit. What we have in post-war America is more leisure time, we have more money, and we have interest in other activities, and we have a migration to the suburbs. So that threatens the motion picture industry. And then we all have agreements between motion picture industry and TV, and essentially TV becomes a subsidiary market for motion pictures. With this threat, we, in the film and the television age, we get a response. What does the movie industry do in order to bring people out of the living room and get them back into the theaters? Well, it is technical innovations. It is the technical innovation that occurs here. We go from what they call flat. On the left there, you see what you'd see with a flat 1.33 to 1 ratio in the old movies to a wide vision, wide scope, what we call scope, which is a 2.35 to 1 ratio, in which it's broader. It's a rectangular screen as opposed to a square screen. So you need to know, because our video series talked about this, the aspect ratio. It is width to height of the projected image. So when we're saying it's 2.35 to 1 in CinemaScope, what we're saying is that it's a little over twice as wide as it is tall. And so you have a new palette to paint on. That new palette is in what we call widescreen, of course. And it's as our video series mentioned, you get Cinerama, which is that very, very wide screen that appeals to your peripheral vision. And there is a small little video company, a little DVD company, I think it's called Flicker Alley, if I'm correct, that has been producing DVDs of some of those early widescreen Cinerama movies. And in order to get the full effect, they create what they call the smile box effect, which is what this roller coaster ride thing looks like on your screen, to give you that full effect of the screen that comes around like this. It just comes around so that you can see things out of the corner of your eye. CinemaScope was not quite as large as that. We just saw the CinemaScope emblem on the previous slide. And then Panavision, which improved upon CinemaScope. And also our video series mentioned this, and it's very important, the technical modifications for widescreen to TV. What they referred to as the panning and scanning, letterboxing, and what they call safe action area. But it is important because remember, directors and photographers design for the wide screen. When television was not in widescreen, you were losing part of your picture and you're losing part of the aesthetic effect of it. Also, at this time in the 1950s, in order to bring audiences in, there are creative innovations by independent producers. And that here would be American International Pictures that discovers the teen market. That teenagers now have more money than they've ever had, and they have more time on their hands. So films are made in order to bring that audience. And one of the things that appeals to these teenagers are monsters. So we have in the 1950s, we have a plethora of monster movies, almost, one every week. And also, we begin to turn to low-budget exploitation pictures, and we get some very interesting films out of that, by the way. Well, we got to move on. In the 1960s, we have a transition between the older generation of movies represented in sexuality by the Rock Hudson and Doris Day naughty movies like Lover Come Back, all the way at the end of the decade to Mike Nichols, who just recently died, but his fantastic film, The Graduate. Two different worlds there. Hollywood changes. I'm not going to go through all of these things here, but you'll find that on the website. Not website, on the Moodle to download on our study guide. You'll find these significant ideas here, but it's the change, and it's a film school generation. This is the change that is occurring. We've got a crazy world out there with university protests, nonviolent activism. We've got the assassinations that occurred. You have now in women's liberation, and then you have the sexual revolution that changes everything in Hollywood. And we can go on and on and on and go all through this, understand the MPA rating system then and now. There's no more censorship. There is sort of, but you can ignore it, there isn't. The new wave for the French movie critics who discover American classic films, published in a cinema journal called Cahiers du Cinéma. What we have now is the intellectuals have discovered movies. It becomes a movement all its own. And you can go to school and, of all things, get a PhD in movies. Then there's the Brat Pack and so forth, and blah, 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 blah. Become familiar with these people. And I'm not going to go through all those movies and understand this new media. That's also, you'll understand that. So that's it, folks. That's all. Just remember, exam closes early on Thursday. Your extra credit is due on December 9th. And avoid the rush. Take the exam early. And that's it. Good night and good luck.